Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into the humid, vibrant heart of 17th century West Central Africa, a land teeming with rich traditions, intricate political structures, and the encroaching shadow of European ambition. We're venturing into the world of Queen Nzinga, a figure so fiercely determined, so strategically brilliant, and so utterly captivating that her story truly belongs in the annals of legends. Imagine the dense emerald canopies of the Angolan rainforest, alive with the buzzing of insects and the calls of exotic birds. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flora, carrying whispers of ancient spirits and the distant rhythm of drums. You can almost feel the sun-baked earth beneath your bare feet as you envision the thriving kingdom of Ndongo, where our story begins. This was Nzinga's cradle, a place of powerful rulers and proud people, but also a land increasingly eyed by foreign powers. But you probably won't survive this deep dive into historical intrigue without at least a mild existential crisis about your own diplomatic skills. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the Mbondu Kingdom of Ndongo, a sophisticated political entity in what is now modern-day Angola, flourishing long before the Portuguese truly made their mark. This wasn't some loosely organized tribal group. Ndongo was a complex society with a highly centralized government, a developed agricultural system, and a vibrant trade network. Its capital was Kabasa, a bustling hub where goods and ideas flowed freely, and where the Angola, or king, held sway. The Mbondu people had a rich oral tradition, intricate spiritual beliefs involving ancestor veneration and nature spirits, and a martial prowess that was about to be sorely tested. Nzinga, whose full name was Ana de Souza, Nzinga Mbondu, was born around 1583. Her birth came with a rather dramatic sign. If the legends are to be believed, she was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck. A detail interpreted by Mbondu elders as a powerful omen of her future as a fearless and assertive leader. This wasn't just a quirky birthmark. It was seen as a mark of destiny, signifying someone who would wield great power and authority, even perhaps rule. Imagine the hushed whispers, the knowing glances among the wise women as they looked at this newborn destined for greatness. You'd probably just be thinking, ooh, tight squeeze. Her father, Kilwanji Kiondambi, was the reigning Angola of Ndongo. He was a seasoned ruler, well acquainted with the subtle dance of power, both within his kingdom and with the various European interlopers who were increasingly making their presence felt along the coast. He understood the delicate balance required to maintain sovereignty in the face of burgeoning threats. Nzinga, as a favored child, would have had unparalleled access to this world of politics and statecraft. She would have observed her father in council, seen him preside over disputes, and watched him navigate the treacherous waters of early colonial relations. It was essentially an intense, hands-on masterclass in leadership from childhood. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's early life experiences, particularly her close observation of her father's rule and his dealings with the Portuguese, more significantly influenced her later diplomatic and military strategies, or if her inherent personality traits were the dominant factor in her rise. Was she a product of her environment, or a singular force of nature? Probably a good mix, like most complex historical figures. But her childhood certainly provided a remarkable foundation for what was to come. The Portuguese, meanwhile, were already a thorn in Ndongo's side. Their initial interest was primarily in trade, especially for enslaved people, and valuable resources. They established settlements along the coast, most notably at Luanda, and began to exert their influence, slowly, insidiously, threatening the traditional authority of the Angola. You can almost hear the distant, ominous creak of European ships on the horizon, signaling a shift in the political winds of Angola that would define Nzinga's entire life. So, you've glimpsed the vibrant world of Ndongo and the early stirrings of Portuguese ambition. Now, let's peel back another layer and delve deeper into Nzinga's formative years, watching how the seeds of her extraordinary destiny were sown. You find yourself observing her as a child and young woman. It's not just a royal princess, but an astute absorber, absorbing every nuance of her father's court and the escalating tensions around her. Nzinga wasn't just born into royalty. She was born into a political hotbed. Her father, Angola Kiluanji Kiandambi, was a strategic and often pragmatic ruler. He understood that the Portuguese, with their firearms and growing coastal presence, posed a new kind of threat, one that couldn't be ignored or simply pushed back with traditional warfare alone. Young Nzinga would have been privy to the lengthy discussions, the hurried messengers arriving with dispatches from the coast, and the weary expressions of her father's advisors as they grappled with the encroaching European power. She saw firsthand the delicate balance between asserting sovereignty and engaging in necessary, albeit uncomfortable, diplomacy. It was essentially her version of watching the news, except the news directly affected whether her family kept their heads. Unlike many royal women of her time, Nzinga was not confined to traditional domestic roles. Her father recognized her sharp intellect and an innate strategic mind. He reportedly took her to his war councils, allowing her to listen and learn. Imagine a young Nzinga, perhaps perched quietly in a corner, her eyes keenly following the map scratched into the earth, listening to the arguments for attack or negotiation, absorbing the military tactics and diplomatic maneuvers. This was an education far more practical than any formal schooling, forging her into a shrewd political operator from a remarkably young age. This hands-on tutelage was incredibly rare for a woman in her position, testament to her father's foresight and her own undeniable aptitude. Her childhood was also shaped by the presence of her siblings. She had at least two sisters, Kifunji and Mukambo, and a brother Angola and Bondi. While the details of their early relationships are scarce, it's safe to assume that, like any royal family, there would have been a mix of affection, rivalry, and shared destiny. These family bonds, especially with her brother, would play a critical role in her adult life, sometimes providing support, sometimes presenting immense challenges. It's like your own family dynamic, but with a kingdom at stake. A quirky, or perhaps more accurately, poignant tidbit about Nzinga's childhood concerns the deep spiritual beliefs of the Mbundu people. Nzinga would have been raised within a worldview where ancestors were active participants in daily life, spirits inhabited the natural world, and rituals connected the living with the unseen realms. Her actions, her father's decisions, the fate of the kingdom would all have been interpreted through this spiritual lens. This deep connection to her ancestral land and spiritual heritage would become a wellspring of strength and legitimacy for her throughout her life. Even as she later navigated the complexities of Christian conversion, it provided a powerful, grounding narrative for her people that the Portuguese simply could not comprehend. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's early exposure to warfare and diplomacy during her childhood inherently desensitized her to the brutal realities of power, or if it instead fostered a profound sense of responsibility and a strategic rather than purely emotional approach to conflict. Did witnessing her father's struggles harden her heart, or sharpen her resolve to protect her people? It's a compelling question, as many leaders are forged in the fires of their youth. The growing Portuguese threat meant that Ndongo was never truly at peace during Nzinga's youth. Skirmishes along the border, disputes over trade routes, and the constant pressure to supply enslaved people to the European markets were a regular backdrop. Nzinga would have learned early on that power was not static. It had to be constantly asserted, defended, and cleverly negotiated for. This was a brutal but invaluable education, preparing her for a life that would demand every ounce of her cunning, courage, and strategic genius. She wasn't playing with dolls. She was learning how to play kingdoms. You've watched Nzinga absorb the political currents of her youth, seeing the subtle shifts in power within Ndongo. Now let us focus our gaze squarely on the external force that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her life and the destiny of her people: the relentless, ever-increasing Portuguese arrival. A shifting tide. This wasn't a sudden invasion, but a gradual, insidious creep, like water steadily eroding a coastline, eventually threatening to swallow everything in its path. Imagine the Portuguese presence growing from a few trading outposts along the coast to fortified settlements, most notably Luanda, established in 1575. At first, their primary interest was legitimate trade: ivory, copper, various goods. But the insatiable demand for enslaved people, driven by the burgeoning plantations in Brazil and the Americas, quickly overshadowed all other commercial interests. For the Portuguese, Africa wasn't just a source of goods, it was a boundless reservoir of human labor, a commodity more valuable than gold. You can almost hear the clanging of blacksmiths' hammers, not for tools, but for shackles, a grim sound carried on the ocean breeze. The Portuguese didn't initially arrive as conquerors of vast territories. They operated through a strategy of divide and conquer, exploiting existing rivalries between African kingdoms and even within the Mbundu kingdom itself. They would form alliances with smaller chiefdoms hostile to Ndongo, offering firearms and other European goods in exchange for access to trade routes and, crucially, for enslaved people captured in local conflicts. This created a corrosive cycle. Internal conflicts were exacerbated by external arms, leading to more captives, which fueled the slave trade, further destabilizing the region. It's like watching someone hand out weapons in a family dispute, knowing exactly how it will escalate. As the demand for enslaved people escalated, the nature of the Portuguese presence became increasingly aggressive. Their trading posts evolved into military garrisons, and their diplomatic overtures often came backed by the implicit threat of force. They began to demand tribute, to assert authority over traditional land, and to interfere directly in Mbundu succession disputes. The lines between trade, diplomacy, and outright military coercion blurred, becoming a constant source of tension and conflict for the Angola of Ndongo. A quirky and rather ironic tidbit from this period involves the misunderstanding of African political structures by the Portuguese. They often struggled to grasp the complex, decentralized nature of some African kingdoms, frequently mistaking alliances and tributary relationships for direct subjugation. This led to miscalculations and diplomatic blunders on their part, but also two opportunities for cunning African rulers like Nzinga's father to play them off against each other or exploit their ignorance. They saw a vast, undifferentiated Africa ripe for exploitation, rather than a mosaic of intricate sovereign states. It's like trying to understand a complex tapestry by only looking at a single thread. Historians still argue whether the primary driver of Portuguese aggression was purely economic, fueled by the demand for enslaved labor, or if it also encompassed a genuine, albeit ethnocentric, belief in their civilizing mission to convert Africans to Christianity and impose European governance. Was it purely avarice, or a misguided form of paternalism, or a potent, dangerous blend of both? This debate speaks to the enduring complexities of colonial motivations. For Nzinga and her people, the Portuguese arrival wasn't a distant phenomenon. It was a palpable, growing threat that manifested in raids, disruptions to agriculture, and the constant fear of capture. Her father, the Angola, spent much of his reign trying to contain this encroaching tide, sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through direct military confrontation. Nzinga, observing all of this, learned valuable lessons about the nature of a seemingly unstoppable force, and perhaps more importantly, about the subtle weaknesses that even the most powerful opponent might possess. The tide was indeed shifting, and Nzinga was preparing to become a formidable wave herself. The relentless tide of Portuguese expansion began to lap at the shores of Ndongo, disrupting its very foundations. Now, let's bring our focus back to Nzinga herself. It's in the intimate crucible of her early life. Sisterly bonds, early losses. While the political landscape was turbulent, the personal tragedies and relationships within her royal family profoundly shaped her character, hardening her resolve and perhaps planting the seeds of later strategic decisions. Imagine the complex dynamics within a royal African household. Nzinga, as we know, was one of several children of Angola Kilowanji Kianambi. She had at least two sisters, Kafunji and Mukambo, and a brother Mambandi. While historical records don't offer many intimate details of their childhood interactions, it's safe to assume the usual mix of sibling camaraderie, occasional squabbles, and the unique pressures of growing up in a ruling family where alliances and rivalries could subtly shift. These early relationships would form the initial social fabric of her world, before the grander political stage beckoned. However, Nzinga's early life was also marked by significant sorrows. The historical accounts suggest that she experienced the loss of close family members, possibly including other siblings, at a relatively young age. The exact circumstances are often vague, but in a time of conflict, disease, and the constant threat of the burgeoning slave trade, life was precarious for everyone, even royalty. These early losses would have instilled in her a profound understanding of impermanence and a fierce protective instinct for those she cared about, and eventually for her people. You learn quickly that life is a delicate, precious thing when you see it extinguished too soon, don't you? One of the most significant and enduring of these familial bonds was with her sister, Kafunji. Kafunji would later play a crucial, if tragic, role in Nzinga's life, serving as both a political pawn and a deeply personal connection. Their shared experiences growing up amidst the Portuguese threat would have forged a unique understanding between them, a bond that would be tested by the brutal realities of power and survival. A quirky, yet deeply poignant, tidbit reveals the Mbundu cultural practice of naming children with prophetic or descriptive qualities. While we know her as Nzinga, her full name, Nzinga Mbandi, likely carried deeper meanings within the Mbundu language, possibly referencing her spirit or destiny. Such naming conventions reinforce the idea that individuals were born with certain innate qualities or destinies, a concept that would certainly resonate with Nzinga's powerful personality and life path. Echoing that umbilical cord prophecy, it's like being named victory or conqueror from birth, setting a high bar for your future. Historians still argue whether the personal tragedies and losses Nzinga experienced in her youth, such as the death of family members, primarily contributed to her remarkable resilience and strategic ruthlessness, or if they instead fostered a deeper sense of empathy and a desire to protect her people from similar suffering. Did adversity harden her heart, or sharpen her resolve to prevent future sorrows for others? It's a nuanced question, as grief can manifest in many different ways, shaping a leader in unpredictable directions. These early experiences of both family warmth and profound loss provided a critical foundation for Nzinga. They taught her about loyalty and betrayal, about the fragility of life, and about the deep emotional stakes involved in the game of power. She learned that even within the protective walls of royalty, sorrow could strike, and that one must be prepared to fight not just for a crown, but for survival itself. The world was teaching her harsh lessons, and Nzinga, ever the quick study, was absorbing every one. You felt the personal weight of Nzinga's early losses, understanding how family dynamics and sorrow forged her spirit. Now, the stage shifts slightly as the responsibility of leadership passes to her brother. We turn our attention to a brother's reign. Fragile peace, a period where Nzinga's sibling Bandi took the reins of power, attempting to navigate the treacherous waters of Portuguese relations and laying the groundwork perhaps unintentionally for Nzinga's own eventual rise. Imagine the atmosphere in the court of Ndongo after the passing of Angola Kilanji Kianumbi, Nzinga's father. Succession in African kingdoms was often complex, not always strictly hereditary, and could involve intense political maneuvering. However, it was Nzinga's brother Mbandi who ultimately ascended to the Angolaship. He inherited a kingdom under immense pressure, caught between its proud sovereignty and the ever-growing demands of the Portuguese. His reign would be characterized by a desperate attempt to maintain a semblance of peace. A fragile truce constantly threatened by betrayal and escalating demands. Mbandi, known as Angola, Mbandi Kilanji, found himself in an unenviable position. The Portuguese had established their stronghold at Luanda, and their insatiable appetite for enslaved people was making traditional trade relations untenable. They weren't just merchants anymore. They were a military and colonial force, asserting their will through intimidation and skirmishes. Mbandi attempted to manage this volatile situation primarily through negotiation and occasional limited military resistance. He understood the superior firepower of the Portuguese, but also the deep resentment of his people at the encroachment on their sovereignty and the devastating impact of the slave trade. During Mbandi's reign, Nzinga, as a powerful and influential royal, would have continued her informal political education. She would have observed her brother's diplomatic efforts, witnessing firsthand the frustrations and humiliations he endured in dealing with the Portuguese governors. She would have seen the subtle ways in which treaties were breached, promises broken, and new demands constantly imposed. This period was a masterclass for Nzinga in the art of colonial deception, showing her that European agreements were often merely strategic pauses, not genuine commitments to peace. It's like watching someone try to negotiate with a really bad faith actor, learning all the dirty tricks as you go. Quirky and rather unfortunate. Tidbit from Mbandi's reign is the Portuguese practice of demanding hostages as a guarantee for treaties. Mbandi, in an attempt to secure peace, reportedly sent some of his own family members or high-ranking nobles to Luanda as surety. This was a common tactic by the Portuguese, designed to exert psychological pressure and ensure compliance. These hostages often lived in precarious conditions, symbols of their kingdom's vulnerability. Imagine the agonizing choice of sending your loved ones into the lion's den, just to buy a temporary reprieve. Historians still argue whether Mbandi's approach of cautious diplomacy and limited resistance was a pragmatic necessity given the overwhelming Portuguese power, or if it demonstrated a lack of the fierce resolve that would later characterize Nzinga's reign. Was he a weak ruler, or simply a realistic one, operating under impossible circumstances? This debate often shapes perceptions of his relationship with Nzinga, who would later adopt a far more aggressive stance. The period of Mbandi's rule was one of simmering tension. Raids for enslaved people continued, often instigated by Portuguese-backed Ndongo mercenaries, creating immense suffering and instability for the Mbundu people. The peace was always fragile, more an absence of outright war than a state of genuine tranquility. Nzinga watched, she learned, and she formulated her own ideas about how to confront the relentless Portuguese tide. She saw the limits of appeasement and the devastating consequences of yielding ground. The stage was being set for her dramatic intervention, and the lessons absorbed during her brother's fragile reign would become invaluable tools in her own formidable arsenal. You've observed Mbandi's cautious navigation of Ndongo's fraught relationship with the Portuguese, a dance of limited resistance and fragile diplomacy. Now, as the pressure mounts, you'll see how diplomacy's first test, Portuguese demands, escalated, forcing Mbandi into increasingly untenable positions and inadvertently pushing Nzinga closer to the center of power, showcasing her inherent diplomatic prowess even before she ruled. Imagine the Portuguese governors in Luanda, ever keen to expand their influence and, crucially, secure more enslaved people for their booming transatlantic trade. Their demands on Ndongo were relentless and multifaceted. They wanted increased access to internal trade routes, greater tribute payments, and most agonizingly for the Angola, steady supply of war captives to fuel their human cargo ships. Each demand chipped away at Ndongo's sovereignty, creating deep resentment among the Mbundu people. It's like a bully constantly pushing for more, knowing you're desperate to avoid a fight. Mbandi, caught between the internal pressures of his people and the external might of the Portuguese, found himself in an impossible bind. He understood that outright refusal meant war, a conflict he was ill-equipped to win decisively against Portuguese firearms and their increasingly effective African allies, like the Angola. Yet, acceding to every demand meant becoming a vassal, sacrificing his kingdom's independence and condemning more of his people to the horrors of the slave trade. He tried to walk a tightrope, offering concessions where necessary, stalling where possible, and occasionally engaging in limited skirmishes to demonstrate defiance without provoking a full-scale invasion. It was during these escalating diplomatic crises that Nzinga's unique talents began to shine more brightly. While Mbandi was the official Angola, Nzinga, as his trusted advisor and sister, often played a crucial role behind the scenes. She possessed a keen understanding of Portuguese tactics, having observed them from her youth. Her intelligence, sharp wit, and strategic mind made her an invaluable asset in preparing for negotiations, analyzing Portuguese demands, and formulating counter-proposals. She was, in essence, her brother's chief strategist and foreign policy expert. A quirky, or perhaps more accurately, cunning, tidbit from this period is Nzinga's rumored ability to master European languages quickly. While direct evidence is scarce, it's believed she had a remarkable aptitude for languages, possibly picking up Portuguese and perhaps even Latin. This would have given her an immense advantage in direct negotiations, allowing her to understand subtleties and nuances that her interpreters might miss, and to communicate directly with the colonial powers, bypassing potential misrepresentations. Imagine being able to understand exactly what your opponent is saying, even when they think you can't. That's a serious superpower. Historians still argue whether Mbandi's seemingly indecisive or accommodating stance towards the Portuguese during this period was a sign of weakness, or a deliberate if desperate strategy to buy time for his kingdom to strengthen and for a more favorable international climate to emerge. Was he genuinely overwhelmed, or was he playing a long game, unknowingly setting the stage for Nzinga's more aggressive and successful resistance? This debate often shapes how his legacy is viewed in relation to his formidable sisters. As Portuguese demands grew, Mbandi was eventually compelled to seek a more formal, high-level negotiation with the Portuguese governor João Correia de Sousa in Luanda. This was a critical juncture, and for this pivotal mission, Mbandi made a momentous decision. He dispatched his sister Nzinga as his official envoy. This choice, sending a woman to lead such a crucial diplomatic mission, was highly unusual for the time, both in Africa and in Europe, and speaks volumes about Mbandi's trust in her abilities and Nzinga's already formidable reputation. The stage was now set for Nzinga's direct confrontation with the colonial power, a confrontation that would begin with a chair and a carpet. You've witnessed Nzinga's growing influence in Mbandi. A desperate gamble in sending his astute sister to negotiate with the formidable Portuguese, you prepared to embark on that pivotal journey, experiencing the Luanda mission. Nzinga's rise, a diplomatic venture that would not only define her burgeoning legend, but also reveal the depth of her strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve. Imagine the journey from the inland kingdom of Ndongo through unfamiliar, often hostile territories, down to the bustling, humid coastal city of Luanda. This wasn't a casual trip. It was a perilous trek, undertaken by Nzinga and her retinue, through lands sometimes controlled by rival African groups or Portuguese-backed forces. The air would grow heavier, saltier as they approached the coast, the sounds of the forest, gradually giving way to the clamor of a colonial port city. The cries of gulls, the creak of ships, the babble of European and African languages, and the ever-present haunting undertone of enslaved people being loaded onto vessels. It's like arriving in a completely different world, and knowing you have to conquer it with words. Luanda itself, founded in 1575, was the heart of Portuguese colonial power in Angola. It was a thriving, yet morally compromised, port city. Its prosperity built almost entirely on the horrific transatlantic slave trade. Fortifications loomed, churches stood tall, and European customs clashed starkly with African traditions. For Nzinga, stepping into this environment was a direct confrontation with the very force that threatened her people. Every building, every street, every Portuguese soldier was a symbol of the encroachment she was there to resist. Nzinga arrived not as a supplicant, but as an ambassador representing a sovereign nation. She came equipped not just with her intellect, but also with an understanding of her brother's precarious position and the dire needs of her people. Her mission was clear: negotiate a peace treaty, secure the return of Ndongo refugees held by the Portuguese, and crucially halt the Portuguese encroachment in slave raids. It was a tall order, a diplomatic mountain to climb, especially for someone who, by European standards, was simply a native woman. But Nzinga was no ordinary woman, quirky and rather revealing. Tidbit. Surrounding Nzinga's arrival in Luanda is her calculated choice of traditional Mbundu attire over European garments. While some African leaders might have adopted European dress to appear more civilized or amenable, Nzinga reportedly arrived in her full traditional regalia, adorned with symbols of her rank and spiritual authority. This was a deliberate statement. She was there on her own terms, representing her people and their sovereignty, not as someone seeking to assimilate or be subservient. It was a subtle, yet powerful act of cultural defiance, setting the tone for the entire negotiation. Imagine walking into a high-stakes corporate meeting in full tribal war paint. Certainly gets attention, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether Nzinga's diplomatic mission to Luanda, despite her personal brilliance, was doomed to limited success from the start due to the fundamental, irreconcilable differences in Portuguese and Mbundu objectives, particularly concerning the slave trade. Was any genuine, lasting peace truly achievable given the economic realities of the time? Or was Nzinga's mission merely a heroic, but ultimately constrained effort in a losing battle? This debate speaks to the often insurmountable forces of colonial greed. Nzinga's objective was to secure a treaty that would protect her kingdom, but she knew this would require more than just polite conversation. It would demand astute observation, unwavering resolve, and a willingness to challenge the subtle assertions of Portuguese dominance. Her first test of wills with Governor João Correia de Sousa would come not in a fierce debate, but in the very seating arrangement of the negotiation chamber, a seemingly trivial detail. That Nzinga would transform into a powerful demonstration of her unyielding sovereignty. You've arrived with Nzinga in Luanda, feeling the tension and the weight of her diplomatic mission. Now, prepare to witness one of the most iconic moments in her storied life. It's a subtle yet profound act of defiance that perfectly encapsulated her unwavering spirit. Chair and carpet, a symbolic stand. This wasn't a battle fought with spears or muskets, but with wit, dignity, and a clear refusal to be undermined by colonial arrogance. Imagine the scene in the reception hall of the Portuguese governor, João Correia de Sousa, Nzinga. Clad in your regal Mbundu attire, carrying the full weight of your kingdom's sovereignty on your shoulders. As you enter, the governor is seated in his grand ornate chair, clearly positioned to signify his superior status. On the floor before him, there's a luxurious carpet, seemingly inviting you to sit directly on it, a common practice for supplicants or lesser dignitaries in European courts. It's a deliberate power play, a subtle insult designed to assert Portuguese dominance from the very first moment. And most people would just shrug and sit, wouldn't they? Not Nzinga. Nzinga observed this setup with keen eyes. To sit on the carpet would imply subservience, acknowledging the governor's superior rank and Ndo's diminished status. It would be a symbolic surrender before negotiations even began. In that charged silence, a lesser diplomat might have hesitated, unsure how to respond without causing outright offense. But Nzinga was a master of improvisation and strategic defiance. Without a moment of hesitation, she signaled to one of her attendants. The attendant immediately knelt on all fours, forming a human chair with their back. Nzinga then calmly and majestically seated herself on her attendant's back, elevating herself to the same height as the Portuguese governor, meeting his gaze as an equal. Alessa was unmistakable. She would not sit on the floor before him. She represented a sovereign kingdom, and she demanded respect commensurate with her status. It was a silent mic drop, centuries before microphones were even invented. This bold and genius maneuver immediately shifted the power dynamic in the room. The governor, initially intending to assert his dominance, was instead confronted with a display of unshakable pride and quick thinking that he could not easily counter. He was forced to acknowledge her as an equal, at least in that moment, or risk appearing foolish and undignified in his own court. It established Nzinga as a force to be reckoned with, someone who would not be easily intimidated or relegated to an inferior position. A quirky and rather fascinating tidbit often recounted with this incident is Nzinga's rumored response after the negotiations concluded and she had to leave. As she prepared to depart, the attendant who had served as her chair remained kneeling. When the governor perhaps gestured for the attendant to rise or looked puzzled, Nzinga is said to have calmly stated that it was not fitting for a wee queen to use the same chair twice, or that her attendant had served their purpose and was now free. This further reinforced her authority and the symbolic nature of her act, showing that it was a calculated performance, not just an impulsive reaction. It was the ultimate drop the mic and walk away moment. Historians still argue whether the chair and carpet incident as vividly portrayed in later accounts was a literal occurrence, or whether it evolved into a more symbolic anecdote that perfectly captured Nzinga's character and her unyielding resistance to Portuguese subjugation. Regardless of its absolute literal accuracy, it undeniably serves as a powerful illustration of her diplomatic genius and her refusal to be belittled. It's a story that perfectly embodies her spirit. This symbolic stand set the tone for Nzinga's entire diplomatic career. It showcased her ability to use non-military means to assert power, to challenge colonial assumptions, and to demand recognition for her people's sovereignty. It was a clear declaration that she would fight on every front with every tool at her disposal to protect Ndongo from Portuguese domination. The negotiations were just beginning, but Nzinga had already won the first crucial battle of wills. You've witnessed Nzinga's audacious stand with the human chair, a powerful opening statement in her diplomatic ballet. Now, as the negotiations proceed, you'll observe another surprising and highly strategic move on her part: baptism and betrayal, a strategic conversion. This wasn't a sudden spiritual epiphany but a calculated political maneuver. temporary embrace of the colonizers' religion to gain a crucial advantage, revealing Nzinga's unparalleled pragmatism. Imagine the atmosphere in Luanda after her initial display of defiance. Governor de Souza, perhaps a bit rattled by Nzinga's unexpected poise, recognized her as publicly adopting the religion of her enemies, a move that would have shocked many, both among her own people and, perhaps, even the Portuguese themselves, who might not have expected such a savvy tactical play. On the day of her baptism, Nzinga took the Christian name Ana de Souza, adopting the name of her godparents, Governor João Correia de Souza and his wife. Ana, this seemingly profound religious conversion was, in fact, a brilliant political chess move. By aligning herself, even nominally, with the Portuguese crown and the Catholic Church, Nzinga aimed to achieve several strategic objectives. Firstly, it would grant her a new level of diplomatic legitimacy in the eyes of the Portuguese. As a Christian convert, she might be seen as less barbaric and more amenable to negotiation, potentially softening their stance. It's like wearing the opposing team's jersey to get past security. Secondly, and perhaps more subtly, becoming a godchild of the governor created a fictional kinship tie within the European political framework. God parentage in that era carried significant social and familial obligations. Nzinga was subtly trying to bind the governor to her through a spiritual familial bond, hoping to leverage this for more favorable terms in the ongoing peace discussions. She was playing their game, using their own rules and customs against them. It was a remarkably sophisticated understanding of European cultural nuances for an African ruler of that time. A quirky and rather cynical tidbit is that this baptism was almost certainly a tactical conversion, not a genuine one. Nzinga continued to practice her traditional Mbindu spiritual beliefs in private, and her later actions would confirm that her Christian faith was primarily a tool. She was a master of political expediency, willing to adopt any guise if it served her people's interests. This flexibility in faith would be a hallmark of her long career, showcasing a pragmatism that few leaders then or now could match. Imagine casually switching religions for a business deal and then switching back. That's Nzinga levels of strategic thinking. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's baptism was a calculated risk that ultimately paid off by granting her temporary diplomatic leverage, or if it was a necessary compromise that inadvertently legitimized Portuguese religious and colonial claims over African lands in the long run. Did she gain more than she lost? Or was it a morally ambiguous act with unforeseen negative consequences for her people's spiritual independence? This debate highlights the complex ethical dilemmas faced by leaders in colonial encounters. Despite her calculated conversion, Nzinga understood that the Portuguese concept of peace was fundamentally different from hers. Their goal was control and exploitation. Hers was sovereignty and survival. While the baptism might have opened certain doors and fostered a temporary sense of camaraderie, she knew it was a fragile illusion. The real test of the treaty, and of her strategic gamble, would lie in the concrete terms of the agreement and the willingness of the Portuguese to honor them. She had played her hand, but the game was far from over. You've witnessed Nzinga's astonishing tactical baptism, a masterclass in political pragmatism. Now, the scene shifts to the immediate aftermath of that symbolic act. As the ink dries on an agreement, bringing forth treaty signed, an uneasy truce. This was not a definitive end to conflict, but rather a temporary cessation of hostilities, a fragile and deeply suspicious peace that Nzinga knew could unravel at any moment. Imagine the atmosphere in Luanda as the terms of the treaty were formally agreed upon. On the surface, it seemed like a victory for Ndongo. The Portuguese governor, perhaps swayed by Nzinga's diplomatic prowess and her strategic conversion, agreed to halt incursions into Ndongo territory to release Mbundu prisoners and refugees, and to recognize Mbondi's sovereignty as Angola. For a moment, the relentless pressure seemed to ease. You could almost hear a collective, cautious sigh of relief emanating from Ndongo's representatives. Mingled with the usual clatter of bureaucratic formalities, it's like shaking hands on a deal you're pretty sure the other side will try to wiggle out of, but you do it anyway. However, Nzinga was far too shrewd to be lulled into a false sense of security. She understood the Portuguese. Their words might be amenable, but their actions often spoke a different language. One of continued expansion and an insatiable demand for enslaved people. The ink on the treaty was barely dry before Nzinga began to test its limits, or rather to anticipate its inevitable breaches. She knew that any truce with the Portuguese was inherently uneasy, built on shifting sands of self-interest, rather than genuine mutual respect. One of the immediate points of contention, even with the treaty signed, was the return of refugees. Many Mbundu people had fled Portuguese raids, seeking safety in their controlled territories or with allied African groups. The treaty promised their return, but the logistics and the Portuguese willingness to truly release individuals, especially those who could be enslaved, were constant points of friction. Nzinga pressed hard on this, knowing that the well-being of her people was paramount and a litmus test for Portuguese sincerity. A quirky and rather telling tidbit involves the nature of the peace that was envisioned. For the Portuguese, a peace treaty often meant securing their economic interests and dominance, seeing African kingdoms as subservient. For Nzinga, it meant a return to full sovereignty and the cessation of all external interference. These fundamentally different interpretations were woven into the very fabric of the agreement, creating a built-in tension that guaranteed future conflict. It's like two people agreeing to a compromise when they both have entirely different ideas of what compromise actually means. Historians still argue whether the signing of this initial treaty represented a genuine, albeit short-lived, moment of Portuguese willingness to negotiate fairly, or if it was simply a tactical delay on their part, a temporary strategic pause to regroup and plan for future expansion. Was there a fleeting opportunity for a more equitable relationship, or was the colonial agenda always too deeply entrenched for true peace? This debate highlights the tragic inevitability of conflict given the fundamentally exploitative nature of colonialism. Nzinga returned from Luanda not with triumphant certainty, but with a strategic understanding of the temporary nature of the peace. She had gained some concessions, created a momentary pause in the hostilities, and, most importantly, established herself as a formidable negotiator in the eyes of the Portuguese. She had also likely confirmed her suspicions that true peace would require more than signed documents. It would demand continuous vigilance, unwavering resistance, and perhaps a different kind of war altogether. The stage was set not for enduring tranquility, but for the next, more intense act of her struggle, one that would force her to make even more daring and controversial decisions. You've seen the delicate balance of the uneasy truce, a peace precariously held by the ink of a freshly signed treaty. But as with all things, in the brutal theater of 17th century power, this fragile stability was about to shatter. We now turn to a pivotal moment of profound instability and mystery. Brother S. death. Succession crisis. This sudden loss would plunge Ndongo into turmoil, and perhaps unexpectedly, propel Nzinga directly onto the throne, setting the stage for her most legendary struggles. Imagine the sudden whispers, then the hushed certainty that swept through the kingdom of Ndongo. Angola Mbandi, Nzinga's brother, was dead. The circumstances surrounding his death are steeped in ambiguity and historical debate, fueling suspicion and creating an immediate power vacuum. Was it illness, as some accounts suggest, or something far more sinister? In a time of intense political intrigue, with a powerful foreign enemy constantly stirring the pot, the idea of foul play would naturally loom large. You can almost feel the collective gasp of the court, the immediate scramble for power, like a sudden strong gust of wind scattering dry leaves. The mainstream historical fact here is that Mbandi's death occurred around 1624. His passing left Ndongo vulnerable. He had been the recognized ruler, however beleaguered, and his sudden absence created a vacuum that both internal factions and the Portuguese were eager to exploit. The kingdom, already weakened by years of conflict and the slave trade, now faced the added burden of an uncertain succession. This immediately ignited a fierce succession crisis, while Nzinga, as a powerful and respected royal, was a natural contender. The traditional Mbundu system did not automatically favor female rulers. Although women held significant positions of power and influence in Mbundu society, as priestesses, advisors, and even military leaders, the role of Angola was usually reserved for men. This challenge to established norms meant Nzinga had to assert her claim not just against external threats, but against internal resistance and deeply ingrained traditions. It's like trying to claim the CEO position when the board has always picked male candidates. And half the family is trying to grab it too. A quirky and rather dark fringe tidbit revolves around the rumors of Nzinga's involvement in Mbandi's death. Some Portuguese accounts, eager to discredit her, suggested that Nzinga herself poisoned her brother to seize power. These claims are highly contentious and generally dismissed by modern historians as colonial propaganda aimed at painting her as a ruthless and untrustworthy figure. However, the very existence of such rumors highlights the brutal political landscape and the lengths to which rivals, both African and European, would go to undermine a powerful figure like Nzinga. It's the kind of salacious gossip that would trend on ancient Twitter if it existed. Historians still argue whether Mbandi's death was a genuine accident or illness, or if it was orchestrated by the Portuguese who sought to destabilize Ndongo and install a more compliant ruler. Was his demise a tragic twist of fate, or a calculated act of colonial manipulation? This debate underscores the difficulty of piecing together truth from biased historical records, particularly those left by the colonizers themselves. Regardless of the true cause of Mbandi's death, the consequences were clear and immediate. Nzinga found herself at a critical crossroads. She could retreat into the background, perhaps secure a position of influence under another male ruler, or she could seize the reins of power herself. Given her formidable personality, her lifelong education in statecraft, and her burning desire to protect her people from the Portuguese, her choice was, perhaps, inevitable. The vacuum left by her brother's passing was not an obstacle, but an opportunity. The time for cautious diplomacy was over. The time for a queen to rise and fight had come. You felt the shockwaves of Mbandi's mysterious death and the ensuing succession crisis. Now, as the dust begins to settle, UL witnessed Nzinga's audacious move to claim the throne. Queen's coronation, contested power. This wasn't a peaceful transfer of authority, but a fierce assertion of her right to rule, a struggle against deeply entrenched traditions and the machinations of the Portuguese. Imagine the sacred rituals of an Mbandu coronation. For Nzinga, this would have been a moment of immense spiritual and political significance. She undertook the traditional ceremonies to become the Angola of Ndongo, adopting the title that signified her as the paramount ruler. This included various rites to connect with the ancestors, reaffirm her lineage, and invoke the spiritual powers necessary for leadership. She was embodying not just a political office, but a sacred lineage stretching back generations. You can almost smell the ceremonial smoke, feel the rhythm of the drums, and hear the chants that consecrated her new contested power. However, despite the sacred legitimacy of her coronation, Nzinga's claim to the throne was immediately and vehemently contested. The primary reason was her gender. As we touched upon, the Angolaship was traditionally a male role. Many conservative elements within Ndongo society, including powerful chiefs and elders, were reluctant to accept a female ruler. Despite her intelligence, experience, and the prophetic omens of her birth, this internal opposition became a significant hurdle, diverting resources and attention away from the looming external threat of the Portuguese. It's like trying to run a marathon while simultaneously battling your own team. Members who don't think you should be in the race? The Portuguese, ever keen to exploit internal divisions, immediately capitalized on this succession dispute. They refused to recognize Nzinga as the legitimate Angola, largely because she was unlikely to be a compliant puppet. Instead, they backed rival claimants to the throne, often lesser chiefs who were willing to become their vassals in exchange for military support. This strategy further destabilized Ndongo, creating a civil war within the kingdom, weakening it from the inside out, and making it ripe for Portuguese conquest. They preferred a pliable male figurehead to a formidable warrior queen. A quirky and rather poignant tidbit from this period is Nzinga's strategic adoption of male warrior attire and customs at times. To counteract the traditional resistance to a female ruler and to assert her authority in a male-dominated military landscape, Nzinga reportedly adopted certain masculine attributes in public. This included wearing men's clothing, carrying a battle axe, and even, according to some accounts, taking male consorts. This was not about personal identity. It was a powerful symbolic statement, challenging gender norms to establish her legitimacy as a fierce leader in a world that expected women to be subservient. Imagine breaking all dress codes and gender expectations, just to prove a point and rally your troops. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's decision to directly claim the Angolaship rather than ruling through a male figurehead was a shrewd and necessary assertion of personal power, or if it inadvertently prolonged the internal succession crisis and gave the Portuguese a convenient excuse to deny her legitimacy. Did her courage hasten her rise, or did it create unnecessary obstacles at a critical time for Ndongo? This debate reflects the complexities of leadership in times of profound crisis, where every choice carries significant risk. Nzinga's coronation, therefore, was not an end to her struggles, but the beginning of a new, even more intense phase. She was now the Angola, but she ruled a divided kingdom under siege, both from within and without. The fragile peace her brother had struggled to maintain had shattered, and Nzinga knew that to truly save her people, she would have to embrace a new strategy, one that moved beyond diplomacy and into direct, relentless resistance against the Portuguese. The warrior queen was about to be forged in the fires of conflict. You've watched Nzinga defiantly claim her throne, battling both internal skepticism and Portuguese machinations. The crown she wore was heavy, not just with power, but with the immediate threat of invasion. Diplomacy, as her brother had found, offered only fleeting respite. Now, you'll witness Nzinga's strategic pivot as she unleashes her military genius in guerrilla warfare, adapting tactics. This was her response to overwhelming European firepower, a brilliant and brutal strategy designed to wear down the enemy and protect her beleaguered people. Imagine the Portuguese forces with their muskets, cannons, in European-style military formations, accustomed to conventional battles on open ground. They expected their African opponents to meet them head-on, allowing their superior weaponry to decimate the ranks. But Nzinga was no ordinary opponent. She understood that a direct confrontation would be suicidal. Instead, she revolutionized Mbundu warfare, adopting and perfecting tactics that prioritized mobility, surprise, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. She would not fight their war. No. She would make them fight hers. Nzinga's forces, often outnumbered and outgunned, became masters of the hit-and-run tactic. They would launch lightning-fast raids on Portuguese supply lines, isolated outposts, or vulnerable columns, inflicting damage and then melting back into the dense Angolan forests or the labyrinthine river systems. This denied the Portuguese a decisive pitched battle, forcing them to constantly patrol vast areas, stretching their resources and exhausting their troops. It was the ultimate game of cat and mouse, with Nzinga as the elusive, cunning cat. You can almost hear the rapid drum beats signaling an attack, followed by the sudden, unnerving silence of a vanishing force. She understood the power of attrition, by constantly harassing the Portuguese, making every advance costly, and disrupting their logistics. Nzinga aimed to make the colonial enterprise too expensive and too difficult to maintain. Her fighters used poisoned arrows, set elaborate traps, and employed ambushes in the thick vegetation, turning the very landscape into an ally against the European invaders. The forest, which seemed impenetrable to the Portuguese, was home to Nzinga's warriors. A quirky, yet incredibly effective fringe tidbit about Nzinga's military innovations was her strategic use of false retreats. Her forces would sometimes engage the Portuguese briefly, then feign a disorganized retreat, drawing the overconfident Europeans into an ambush zone. Once lured into unfavorable terrain, Nzinga's hidden forces would emerge, surrounding and decimating the disoriented Portuguese columns. This required incredible discipline and coordination from her troops, transforming a perceived weakness into a deadly trap. It's like faking a limp to lure your opponent into a false sense of security, then suddenly sprinting past them. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's adoption of guerrilla warfare was solely a pragmatic military necessity, it's born of disadvantage, or if it also reflected a deeper understanding of psychological warfare aiming to demoralize the Portuguese and break their will to fight. Was it simply about winning battles, or about eroding the colonizers' confidence and making the occupation untenable? This debate highlights the sophisticated nature of African military strategies in resisting European powers. This period marked a radical shift for Nzinga. She transformed from a diplomat into a fierce warrior queen. Personally leading her troops, inspiring them with her courage and strategic brilliance. She understood that to survive, Ndongo could not simply defend. It had to actively resist, constantly challenging Portuguese authority and making their presence unbearable. This relentless campaign of guerrilla warfare would define her reign for years to come, forcing the Portuguese to reckon with an opponent unlike any they had encountered before. You've witnessed Nzinga's strategic shift to relentless guerrilla warfare, turning the very landscape of Ndongo into a weapon against the Portuguese. But even the most brilliant military mind understands the need for a secure base, a place to regroup and rebuild. This brings us to a pivotal strategic move in her long struggle: Matamba Refuge, a new kingdom. Nzinga, facing overwhelming pressure in Ndongo, made the audacious decision to relocate her base of operations eastward, forging a new power center that would become the heart of her formidable resistance. Imagine the difficult choice Nzinga faced. Ndongo, her ancestral home, was becoming increasingly untenable. Constant Portuguese invasions, internal dissent from rival claimants backed by the Europeans, and the relentless demand for enslaved people were tearing the kingdom apart. To continue the fight effectively, she needed a stronger, more defensible position, a place where she could consolidate her power away from the immediate coastal threat. Her eyes turned eastward towards the kingdom of Matamba. Matamba was an independent Mbundu kingdom, located further inland, beyond the immediate reach of the Portuguese coastal garrisons. It was known for its fierce warriors and its strategic location on important trade routes. This made it an ideal sanctuary and a potential new power base. Nzinga, with her dwindling but loyal forces and a significant number of Mbundu refugees, began a strategic migration towards Matamba. This wasn't a retreat. It was a tactical repositioning, a deliberate act of resilience designed to ensure the survival of her cause. It's like relocating your headquarters to a secret, more defensible bunker when the enemy is closing in on your main office. Upon arriving in Matamba, Nzinga faced a complex situation. The kingdom already had its own ruling elite. She couldn't simply walk in and declare herself queen. Instead, she had to assert her claim, likely through a combination of diplomatic negotiation, the strength of her remaining forces, and perhaps even by force of arms against any immediate resistance. However, historical accounts suggest she successfully managed to integrate herself, eventually establishing her authority and transforming Matamba into the new center of resistance against Portuguese expansion. A quirky yet incredibly effective fringe tidbit about Nzinga's establishment in Matamba is her integration into and strategic manipulation of the existing sociopolitical and spiritual structures of Matamba. This likely involved marrying into the ruling family or forging powerful alliances that legitimized her presence and claims to power within Matamba's own traditions. She didn't just conquer. She absorbed and transformed, showcasing her deep understanding of African political systems. She was a master at playing by local rules to achieve her broader strategic goals, a truly adaptable leader. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's decision to abandon Ndongo for Matamba was a desperate, last-ditch effort to survive, or a brilliant and far-sighted strategic move that ultimately allowed her to continue resistance for decades. Was it a forced retreat or a visionary relocation that saved her cause? This debate touches upon the nature of leadership under extreme duress, weighing immediate necessity against long-term strategic advantage. By establishing herself in Matamba, Nzinga gained several critical advantages. Firstly, she secured a defensible stronghold away from the main Portuguese forces. Secondly, she gained control over new trade routes, crucial for acquiring resources, including firearms. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, she created a new, stronger political entity capable of challenging the Portuguese. Matamba became not just a refuge, but a crucible where her vision for an independent Angola could be forged anew. This move wasn't merely about survival. It was about laying the foundations for a prolonged and relentless struggle, proving that even when seemingly defeated, a true leader can always find a new path forward. You've witnessed Nzinga's audacious move to Matamba, establishing a new base for her resistance. But to truly challenge the Portuguese, she needed more than just a new kingdom. She needed formidable allies. This brings us to a controversial, yet incredibly strategic chapter in her life: Mbangala Alliance. Unlikely partners. This was a pact with a fierce, often feared warrior society that would provide Nzinga with the military might she desperately needed, but at a profound cultural and personal cost. Imagine the Mbangala. They were a highly militarized, nomadic people, renowned for their ferocity in battle and their distinctive social customs. Unlike the settled agricultural Mbundu, the Mbangala followed a strict martial code, living in fortified camps, called colombos, and maintaining their ranks through the absorption of captured children. They were feared by many, including the Portuguese, who often employed them as mercenaries, though never fully controlling them. Their reputation for ruthlessness, particularly their practice of ritualistic infanticide for any child born within the Quilombo, made them a deeply controversial, even terrifying force. You can almost feel the raw, untamed energy emanating from their camps. Stark contrast to the more structured Mbundu society. Nzinga, ever the pragmatist, recognized that conventional Mbundu forces alone could not consistently stand against Portuguese firearms and their European-trained African auxiliaries. The Mbangala, with their sheer numbers, discipline, and ferocious fighting spirit, offered a powerful solution. She made the audacious decision to seek an alliance with them, understanding that it would require significant concessions and a willingness to embrace certain aspects of their lifestyle. It's like a corporate CEO forming a strategic partnership with a wildly successful, but notoriously unconventional, and perhaps ethically ambiguous startup. To solidify this alliance, Nzinga reportedly entered into a ritualized marriage with the Mbangala leader. Kasanje or adopted their customs, becoming a Quilombo leader herself. This was not a conventional marriage or conversion. It was a deeply symbolic act, allowing her to formally integrate into their society and gain their loyalty. For a woman of her royal Mbundu lineage, this would have been a profound cultural leap, requiring immense adaptability and a willingness to transcend her own background for the greater good of her resistance movement. A quirky and deeply unsettling fringe tidbit about this alliance is Nzinga's rumored temporary adoption of certain Mbangala rituals, including the aforementioned practice of ritualistic infanticide. While highly debated and often attributed to Portuguese propaganda designed to demonize her, some historical interpretations suggest Nzinga may have, at least superficially, engaged in or condoned such practices to gain full acceptance and authority within the Mbangala Quilombo. This would have been a horrific compromise, highlighting the brutal realities and moral complexities of survival and power in 17th century Angola. It's the kind of decision that haunts you, even if it's just a historical rumor. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's alliance with the Mbangala was a morally compromising decision that tarnished her legacy, or if it was an absolutely necessary and brilliant strategic maneuver that provided her with the only viable means of sustained resistance against the Portuguese. Was it a Faustian bargain, or an act of supreme pragmatism essential for her people's survival? This debate underscores the ethical dilemmas faced by leaders in colonial contexts, forced to make impossible choices. This alliance transformed Nzinga's military capabilities. With the Mbangala's fierce warriors bolstering her ranks, Nzinga now commanded a formidable fighting force capable of taking on the Portuguese directly. But this military strength came at a cost, challenging her traditional Mbundu identity and requiring her to navigate a new, often brutal, cultural landscape. The partnership was uneasy, but it was effective, giving Nzinga the muscle she needed to truly wage war against the encroaching colonial power, paving the way for her to become an even greater warrior diplomat. You've just witnessed Nzinga's audacious and morally complex alliance with the Mbangala, gaining crucial military might. This strategic partnership, coupled with her inherent leadership qualities, propels us into understanding how she utterly shattered prevailing expectations, making her a beacon of defiance. Gender roles challenged, warrior queen. In an era when most female rulers in Europe were expected to reign through male proxies or within traditional female spheres, Nzinga actively embraced and redefined what it meant to be a sovereign, leading from the front. Imagine the deep-seated gender norms of both 17th century European and many African societies. Women, even royal women, were generally not expected to lead armies, engage in direct combat, or conduct high-stakes diplomacy in person. Their power was often exercised through influence, marriage alliances, or as regents for male heirs. Nzinga, however, blew these expectations to smithereens. She wasn't just a queen who governed. She was a queen who fought. Nzinga consistently defied these expectations by personally leading her troops into battle, clad in warrior attire and reportedly carrying a battle axe. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was a strategic commander on the battlefield, making tactical decisions, inspiring her soldiers, and participating in the fight. This direct engagement in warfare was almost unheard of for a woman of her status, making her a truly unique and formidable figure. You can almost hear the astonishment, perhaps even grudging admiration, in the voices of the Portuguese soldiers who faced her. It's like seeing a CEO, not just in the boardroom, but also on the factory floor, personally assembling the product. Her adoption of male attributes, which we briefly touched upon earlier, was not merely symbolic. It was a powerful assertion of authority and legitimacy in a patriarchal world. By sometimes dressing in men's clothes, by adopting certain male titles, and by performing roles typically reserved for men, she directly challenged the notion that leadership, especially military leadership, was exclusively a male domain. This wasn't about gender identity in a modern sense, but about strategically manipulating perceptions to consolidate and project power. She was signaling to everyone, her own people, the Angola and the Portuguese, that she was a Bongola in every sense of the word, regardless of her sex. A quirky, yet deeply significant fringe tidbit about Nzinga's challenge to gender roles is her rumored abolition of traditional gendered labor roles within her Quilombo, within her Mbangola-aligned camp. Some accounts suggest that she consciously blurred the lines between male and female duties, requiring everyone to contribute to tasks typically assigned to the opposite gender, if it served the needs of the community and the war effort. This was a radical social experiment for its time, prioritizing efficiency and collective survival over rigid gender segregation. Reflecting her pragmatic and forward-thinking leadership, imagine an army where everyone, regardless of gender, learned to both fight and cook, a truly efficient fighting force. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's defiance of gender norms was a conscious proto-feminist statement, a deliberate challenge to patriarchy for its own sake, or if it was primarily a pragmatic adaptation, a necessary means to an end to secure and maintain power in an incredibly hostile environment. Was she driven by a vision of gender equality, or simply by an unyielding will to survive and protect her people at all costs, using any tool at her disposal? This debate speaks to how modern lenses are applied to historical figures and the difficulty of discerning underlying motivations across centuries. Nzinga's willingness to utterly shatter gender expectations made her an almost mythical figure in her own time. She provided an alternative model of leadership, demonstrating that courage, strategic brilliance, and military prowess were not confined by sex. This radical redefinition of her role as a queen, a warrior, and a diplomat allowed her to command loyalty, inspire defiance, and ultimately sustain her decades-long resistance against one of the most powerful colonial empires of the era. She was proving with every strategic decision and every battlefield maneuver that a woman could indeed outmaneuver and outfight any man who dared to challenge her. You've just witnessed Nzinga's profound challenge to gender roles, a warrior queen leading her forces with unmatched ferocity. But beyond the battlefields and diplomatic chambers, another, far more insidious, front defined her struggle: slave trade resistance, a moral stand. This wasn't merely a political or economic disagreement. It was a fundamental clash of values, with Nzinga standing as an unwavering bulwark against the horrific tide of human trafficking.
Imagine the sheer scale of the transatlantic slave trade in the 17th century.
European powers, particularly Portugal, were systematically depopulating parts of Africa, tearing apart families and communities to fuel their burgeoning colonial economies in the Americas. Angola, with its fertile lands and dense populations, was a primary target, turning Luanda into one of the busiest slave ports in the world. The constant raids, the brutal marches, the packed slave ships, this was the brutal backdrop against which Nzinga fought. You can almost hear the heartbreaking cries carried on the wind, a pervasive lament for lost freedom. Nzinga's opposition to the Portuguese slave trade was not merely strategic. It was deeply moral and existential. The trade was devastating her people, destroying the very fabric of Mbundu society, and undermining her kingdom's sovereignty. While some African rulers, under duress or for gain, became complicit in aspects of the trade, Nzinga consistently and vehemently opposed it. She refused to provide enslaved people to the Portuguese, instead offering refuge to those who fled Portuguese captivity and integrating them into her own forces and society. This act of providing sanctuary was a direct defiance of Portuguese economic and political aims. Her resistance was both military and diplomatic. On the battlefield, her guerrilla tactics aimed to disrupt Portuguese slave raids and caravans, freeing captives whenever possible. In negotiations, she consistently demanded the return of Mbundu people taken by the Portuguese, viewing their liberation as a non-negotiable aspect of any true peace. This unwavering stance against the core economic engine of Portuguese colonialism made her a particularly stubborn and frustrating enemy for Lisbon. She wasn't just fighting for land, she was fighting for lives. A quirky and deeply ironic fringe tidbit about Nzinga's anti-slavery stance is that her own Mbangala allies, though crucial to her military success, themselves engaged in forms of slavery and ritualistic practices that were, by modern standards, horrific. Nzinga had to navigate this complex moral landscape, leveraging her alliance against the Portuguese while simultaneously and subtly working to integrate and civilize the Mbangala within her Matamba kingdom, eventually transforming some of their more brutal practices. It's like forming a temporary alliance with someone you deeply disagree with on fundamental ethical points, all for a greater cause. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's commitment to halting the slave trade was driven primarily by a principled moral opposition to human bondage, or if it was also a pragmatic response to the demographic and economic devastation. It wrought upon her own people and her ability to recruit soldiers. Is it a fight for universal human rights, or a necessary defense of her kingdom's population and stability? This debate acknowledges that even the most heroic figures often act from a complex mix of motivations. Nzinga's unwavering opposition to the slave trade solidified her image as a protector of her people and a champion against colonial exploitation. It gave her cause a profound moral weight, rallying not only her own subjects, but also attracting refugees and even other disenchanted African groups to her banner. Her stand against this horrific practice was arguably one of the most defining aspects of her legacy, setting her apart as a leader who dared to challenge the very foundation of European colonial enterprise in Africa. She was fighting for freedom on every front, with every fiber of her being. You've gained a profound understanding of Nzinga's moral stand against the brutal slave trade. Now, as the fight against Portuguese expansion continues to rage, Nzinga, ever the shrewd strategist, recognized that she needed more than just a strong army and a moral cause. She needed powerful international backing. This brings us to Dutch alliance, European intrigue. Fascinating chapter where Nzinga skillfully played European powers against each other, demonstrating her mastery of complex geopolitical chess. Imagine the geopolitical landscape of 17th century Europe. Portugal, while a formidable colonial power, was not without rivals. The Dutch Republic, a rising maritime and commercial power, was increasingly challenging Portuguese dominance across the globe, particularly in lucrative trade routes and colonial territories. They had their eyes on Brazil, a Portuguese colony heavily reliant on enslaved Angolan labor. This rivalry created a window of opportunity, a potential crack in the colonial edifice that Nzinga was quick to exploit. You can almost hear the distant murmurs of European wars and shifting alliances echoing across the oceans. Nzinga, through her extensive network of scouts and informants, was well aware of the Dutch presence along the West African coast and their antagonism towards the Portuguese. She initiated contact with the Dutch, recognizing that their mutual enemy could make them powerful, albeit temporary allies. Her diplomatic overtures were bold, proposing a military and economic alliance against their common foe. This was a sophisticated piece of diplomacy, requiring Nzinga to understand not just local African politics, but also the broader currents of European power struggles. It's like orchestrating a multinational corporate merger, where everyone involved distrusts everyone else, but they all hate the biggest competitor. The Dutch, for their part, were receptive. They saw an opportunity to disrupt Portuguese control over the Angolan slave trade, which supplied labor to Brazil. An alliance with a powerful and effective African ruler like Nzinga offered a strategic foothold on the mainland, providing intelligence, military support, and a distraction for Portuguese forces. The alliance was pragmatic, based on mutual self-interest rather than any shared ideology or deep cultural understanding. A quirky, yet incredibly clever fringe tidbit about this alliance involves Nzinga's careful management of her own religious identity during negotiations with the Protestant Dutch. While she had previously converted to Catholicism for strategic reasons with the Portuguese, she would not have emphasized this fact to the Dutch, who were largely Protestant and deeply antagonistic towards Catholic Spain and Portugal. Her chameleon-like adaptability allowed her to present herself in a way that resonated with each European power, showcasing her remarkable ability to tailor her persona to suit her diplomatic objectives. Imagine switching your entire brand identity for every new business partner. Guess. Nzinga's level of strategic marketing. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's alliance with the Dutch, despite its tactical successes, ultimately contributed to the deeper entrenchment of European powers in Angola by inviting another colonial entity into the region. Was it a necessary evil to combat Portuguese tyranny, or did it inadvertently open the door to a new form of foreign influence that would persist long after her death? This debate highlights the tragic catch-22 faced by African leaders caught between warring colonial factions. The alliance with the Dutch provided Nzinga with crucial resources: firearms, gunpowder, and even some military advisors. With this combined force, Nzinga was able to launch more aggressive campaigns against the Portuguese, shifting the balance of power, at least temporarily. She leveraged the Dutch naval power to challenge Portuguese control of the coast, setting the stage for direct confrontations for strategic ports. This European intrigue was a dangerous game, but Nzinga played it with unparalleled skill, proving that she was not just a warrior, but a master of international diplomacy, capable of navigating the complex currents of global power. You've seen Nzinga's audacious move to ally with the Dutch, injecting European intrigue directly into the Angolan struggle. With this new support, her long-standing goal became clearer: to challenge Portuguese control over the vital coastal areas. This brings us to coastal battles. Push for access. These weren't just skirmishes. They were strategic military campaigns, fierce and often brutal, fought to break the Portuguese stranglehold on trade and communication, and to reconnect Matamba with the outside world. Imagine the strategic importance of the coast. For the Portuguese, Luanda and other coastal forts were their lifeblood. The points of entry for supplies, reinforcements, and crucially, the departure points for enslaved people. For Nzinga, control of the coast meant freedom from Portuguese blockade, direct access to European traders, and the ability to control the flow of goods and information. The very air along the coast would have been thick with the smell of gunpowder, salt, and desperation as battles raged. It's like trying to break out of a besieged city, where the walls are invisible but just as impenetrable. With Dutch naval support and an invigorated land army bolstered by Mbandala warriors and her Mbandu loyalists, Nzinga launched a series of concerted attacks aimed at Portuguese strongholds and vital trade routes leading to the coast. These weren't easy victories. The Portuguese had fortified positions, artillery, and experienced European soldiers, often aided by loyal African auxiliaries. The battles would have been brutal, close-quarters affairs, where the strategic genius of Nzinga's guerrilla tactics met the grinding power of colonial fortifications. The objective was not necessarily to capture and hold every Portuguese fort permanently, but to disrupt their control, demonstrate her power, open up lines of communication and trade for her kingdom of Matamba. She aimed to deny the Portuguese easy access to the interior and to force them onto the defensive, bleeding their resources and morale. Every successful raid, every recaptured village, every disrupted slave caravan chipped away at Portuguese authority and bolstered Nzinga's reputation as an unstoppable force, quirky yet deeply significant. Fringe tidbit involves the psychological warfare Nzinga employed during these coastal pushes. She reportedly used drums, war cries, and even the deliberate manipulation of rumors to unnerve Portuguese garrisons and their African allies. Imagine the chilling sound of Mbangala war cries echoing through the night, or the unsettling rhythm of Mbundu drums drawing closer, designed to break the enemy's nerve before a single arrow was fired. This wasn't just about physical combat. It was about dominating the mental landscape of the battlefield. It's like a rock band using pyrotechnics and smoke machines to hype up the crowd, but for a war. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's relentless push for coastal access was a truly viable long-term strategy for expelling the Portuguese, or if it was more about establishing a powerful negotiating position for future peace talks. Did she genuinely believe she could drive them out entirely? Or was she simply trying to gain enough leverage to secure favorable terms for her independent kingdom? This debate highlights the challenges of judging historical military campaigns without the benefit of knowing all the ruler's true intentions. Ultimately, these coastal battles were a testament to Nzinga's unwavering determination and her strategic brilliance. She understood that to survive, her landlocked kingdom of Matamba needed access to the sea, to trade, and to external alliances. Her push for coastal access, though never fully achieving complete Portuguese expulsion, significantly hampered their operations, inflicted heavy losses, and solidified her position as the undeniable leader of Angolan resistance. She was fighting for breath, for independence, and for a future where her people could live free, beyond the shadow of the slave ship. You've witnessed Nzinga's relentless push for coastal access, a testament to her military acumen. Now, as she expertly navigates the turbulent waters of colonial conflict, let's explore another facet of her strategic genius: religious flexibility, strategic faith. Nzinga, the cunning diplomat and fierce warrior, was also a master at adapting her spiritual identity, embracing and discarding religious affiliations not out of fickle belief, but as calculated maneuvers in her decades-long struggle for sovereignty. Imagine Nzinga having once been baptized Ana de Souza, a devout Catholic in the eyes of the Portuguese. Yet, even as she engaged in that strategic conversion, her heart and her people remained deeply rooted in the traditional Mbundu spiritual beliefs, venerating ancestors, respecting nature spirits, and consulting diviners. She understood that religion, for the European powers, was not merely a matter of faith. It was a tool of colonization, a means to justify conquest and impose control. Nzinga, ever the pragmatist, decided to turn that tool back on them. You can almost see her quietly observing, learning the rituals and rhetoric of European Christianity, not to convert her soul, but to wield its influence. It's like learning the rules of a game you don't fully believe in, just so you can win. Her strategic faith was evident in her dealings with different European powers. With the Portuguese, she embraced Catholicism, even maintaining a Christian name for many years, allowing her to negotiate on seemingly common ground and perhaps appeal to their sense of Christian obligation. Yet, when she allied with the Dutch, who were staunch Protestants and enemies of Catholic Portugal, she conveniently downplayed or discarded her Catholic identity. She was a chameleon, changing her religious coloration to blend into the diplomatic landscape and secure the best advantage for her people. This fluid approach to religion was deeply unsettling to the rigid European mindset, which often viewed conversion as absolute and sincerity as non-negotiable. They struggled to comprehend a leader who could so effortlessly move between spiritual worlds, demonstrating a pragmatism that transcended their own doctrinal boundaries. For Nzinga, faith was not a fixed, dogmatic truth to be adhered to at all costs. It was a flexible instrument in the grand orchestra of geopolitics, played to produce the most harmonious outcome for her kingdom. A quirky and rather insightful fringe tidbit involves Nzinga's rumored establishment of Christian churches within Matamba, even while actively practicing traditional Mbundu religion and integrating Mbangala spiritual customs. This wasn't necessarily a sign of true conversion. It was a clever way to appear amenable to European influence, potentially attracting more trade or even sympathetic missionaries, while simultaneously maintaining her own cultural and spiritual autonomy. She built a bridge but kept the drawbridge ready to be pulled up at any moment. Imagine having a room in your house decorated entirely for a specific guest's tastes, but it's not actually your living style. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's religious flexibility, while strategically brilliant, might have created confusion or syncretism among her own people, potentially diluting traditional Mbundu spiritual practices in the long term. Did her pragmatic approach inadvertently open the door to a deeper, more pervasive form of cultural colonialism, even as she fought military and political battles? This debate delves into the lasting impact of leaders' choices on the cultural identity of their people. Ultimately, strategic faith was a testament to her profound understanding of power dynamics and her ability to manipulate perceptions. She understood that in the grand game of thrones and empires, every variable was a potential tool. By refusing to be confined by rigid religious dogma, she maintained her independence, secured vital alliances, and kept her enemies guessing. She was a spiritual shapeshifter, always with one goal in mind: the survival and sovereignty of her people, even if it meant walking a path of seemingly contradictory beliefs. You've seen Nzinga's remarkable religious flexibility, a testament to her pragmatic approach to power. Now, let us shift our focus from her spiritual adaptability to her undeniable genius in written communication, diplomatic letters, a master communicator. In an era where distance and language barriers made international relations incredibly challenging, Nzinga wielded the quill with as much prowess as she did the battle-axe, crafting correspondence that influenced European courts and cemented her reputation as a formidable and sophisticated leader. Imagine the painstaking process of composing and delivering letters across continents in the 17th century. It involved scribes, translators, long sea voyages, and immense patience. Yet Nzinga engaged in extensive written correspondence with various European powers, not just the Portuguese, but also the Dutch, and even the Vatican. These weren't simple notes. They were often meticulously crafted diplomatic missives, arguing her case, asserting her sovereignty, and outlining her terms with surprising eloquence and legal precision. You can almost see the flickering candlelight on parchment, the deliberate strokes of the pen, knowing that each word carried immense weight and would travel thousands of miles to influence the fate of a kingdom. It's like trying to win an argument via snail mail with incredibly high stakes. Her letters often combined a shrewd understanding of European political and legal frameworks with a powerful assertion of African sovereignty. She cited treaties, highlighted Portuguese betrayals, and eloquently articulated the injustices of the slave trade and colonial encroachment. She used Christian rhetoric when addressing Catholic powers, skillfully weaving in biblical references to appeal to their moral compass. This demonstrated an intellectual capacity and a diplomatic sophistication that utterly confounded European expectations of an African queen. She was effectively a one-woman foreign ministry, operating on a global stage. Nzinga's correspondence was not just reactive, it was proactive. She used letters to initiate alliances, to denounce Portuguese actions to other European courts, and to appeal for support. For instance, her direct appeals to the Dutch provided crucial context and justification for their intervention in Angola. Her correspondence with the Vatican was particularly noteworthy. She leveraged her earlier baptism and presented herself as a loyal, if wronged, Catholic monarch seeking justice, hoping to gain papal intervention against the Portuguese, a quirky yet deeply significant fringe tidbit about Nzinga's letters is the legendary consistency of her diplomatic messaging across decades. Despite shifting alliances, tactical conversions, and numerous setbacks, the core message in her correspondence remained remarkably consistent: the demand for the full sovereignty of her people, the cessation of Portuguese aggression, and the condemnation of the slave trade. This unwavering focus, articulated repeatedly over many years, lent immense credibility and moral authority to her cause, even in the eyes of her enemies. It's like sending the same really well-written complaint letter to customer service for 30 years, and eventually they have to listen. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's eloquent diplomatic letters truly influenced European foreign policy decisions, or if they primarily served as powerful historical records documenting her unwavering resistance and rhetorical brilliance. With limited immediate impact on the grand colonial schemes, did her words move kings and popes, or simply impress later historians? This debate highlights the challenge of assessing the direct causal link between diplomatic communication and major geopolitical shifts. Ultimately, Nzinga's mastery of written communication was another crucial weapon in her arsenal. It allowed her to extend her influence far beyond the battlefields of Angola, reaching the distant centers of European power and challenging the prevailing narratives of colonial conquest. Her letters were not just documents. They were powerful declarations of independence penned with the conviction of a queen who refused to be silenced, ensuring that her voice and the voice of her people resonated across oceans and through time. You've explored Nzinga's impressive command of diplomatic correspondence, extending her influence across continents. But even the most brilliant external strategies can crumble without internal cohesion. This brings us to internal conflicts. Maintaining unity. Nzinga's long reign was not just a battle against the Portuguese. It was a constant, arduous struggle to keep her diverse coalition Bundu refugees fierce in Angola. Warriors in various smaller allied groups united and focused against a common enemy, often amidst scarcity and betrayals. Imagine the sheer difficulty of leading such a disparate group. Nzinga's forces and kingdom were a mosaic of peoples. The original Mambundu from Ndongo, who had fled Portuguese aggression, formidable in Angola, who brought their own distinct and often brutal cultural practices, and various other smaller chiefdoms who periodically joined or left her alliance based on shifting loyalties and immediate gains. Each group had its own customs, its own leaders, and its own sometimes conflicting interests. Maintaining a unified front against a powerful, relentless foe required not just military might, but incredible political finesse and a constant effort to manage dissent. It's like trying to get 3 different warring families to agree on a single holiday dinner menu, while also fighting off an invading army. One of Nzinga's primary challenges was managing the Mbangala. While they were invaluable as fierce warriors, their nomadic lifestyle, their ritualistic practices, and their often independent nature made them difficult allies to control. Nzinga had to exert strong leadership to integrate them into her more settled kingdom of Matamba, gradually influencing their customs and channeling their martial energy solely towards the fight against the Portuguese, rather than allowing them to raid other African communities indiscriminately. Another source of internal conflict stemmed from food and resource scarcity. Prolonged warfare, displacement, and Portuguese disruption of trade routes meant that her kingdom was often under immense economic pressure. Providing for her people and her army, maintaining their morale, and preventing internal squabbles over dwindling resources were constant preoccupations for Nzinga. Hunger and deprivation are fertile grounds for discontent and defection, and Nzinga had to be a shrewd administrator as much as a warrior. A quirky yet deeply human fringe tidbit involves Nzinga's rumored use of personal charisma and public performance to maintain loyalty and quell dissent. She reportedly held elaborate public ceremonies, often featuring traditional dances, songs, and speeches, designed to unify her diverse subjects, reinforce her legitimacy, and remind them of their shared struggle against the Portuguese. She understood the power of collective identity and shared purpose, appealing to emotion and spectacle as much as logic. Imagine a leader holding a massive, inspiring rally to keep everyone on board during a tough war. It's a timeless strategy. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's ability to maintain her coalition was primarily a testament to her personal charisma and iron will, or if it was also a reflection of the deep-seated fear and universal hatred many African groups held for the Portuguese slave trade, which provided a powerful unifying enemy. Was it her individual genius that held them together, or the overwhelming external threat that forced a fragile unity? This debate explores the interplay between individual leadership and broader historical forces. Ultimately, Nzinga's success in maintaining unity amidst internal conflicts was as crucial as any military victory. It demonstrated her profound understanding of human nature, her capacity for adaptable leadership, and her unwavering focus on the ultimate goal, the survival and independence of her people. She was not just leading an army, she was holding together a nation, one difficult decision, one careful negotiation, one inspiring speech at a time. This internal struggle, fought tirelessly behind the scenes, was often as demanding as any battle against the Portuguese. It showcased another vital dimension of her extraordinary statesmanship. You've gained insight into the relentless internal struggle Nzinga faced to maintain unity amongst her diverse people. Within that complex coalition, her relationship with the Mbangala stands out as particularly transformative. This brings us to the Mbangala legacy, a shifting pact. What began as a controversial and morally ambiguous alliance evolved under Nzinga's shrewd leadership, demonstrating her capacity not just to utilize, but to civilize and fundamentally reshape a powerful yet brutal warrior society. Imagine the Mbangala as you first encountered them. Fierce, nomadic warriors with brutal customs like ritualistic infanticide and a purely martial social structure. Their alliance with Nzinga, was born of necessity, providing her with the fighting force she desperately needed against the Portuguese. However, Nzinga knew that such a partnership left unchecked could easily devolve into internal chaos or a new form of tyranny. Her genius lay not just in forging the alliance, but in strategically transforming it over decades. You can almost feel the tension of their initial integration. The clash of cultures within her newly established kingdom of Matamba. One of Nzinga's most significant long-term achievements was the gradual sedentarization and integration of the Mbangala into the more settled, agricultural Mbundu society of Matamba. She encouraged them to abandon their nomadic lifestyle, to build permanent villages, and to adopt farming as a means of sustenance. This was a slow, painstaking process, as it challenged the very core of Mbangala identity. By doing so, Nzinga aimed to reduce their reliance on raiding, increase their food security, and integrate them more fully into the economic and social fabric of her kingdom. It's like getting a group of highly successful, but wild and unpredictable rock stars to settle down and start a stable family business. Crucially, Nzinga also worked to abolish or significantly curtail their more brutal rituals, most notably the practice of infanticide. This required immense diplomatic skill and moral authority, as these practices were central to Mbangala identity and military effectiveness. Her efforts weren't always immediately successful, but over time, through a combination of persuasion, example, and perhaps subtle pressure, she managed to shift their customs. She reportedly adopted many children herself, setting a new precedent for integration and family building within the Colombos, transforming the martial camps into more conventional settlements. A quirky yet deeply strategic fringe tidbit involves Nzinga's use of religious conversion as a tool for social change within the Mbangala. While her own Christianity was often pragmatic, she encouraged the Mbangala to adopt forms of Christianity, or to modify their spiritual practices, which often emphasized community and the value of life, providing an alternative moral framework to their more ruthless traditions. This wasn't necessarily forced conversion, but a subtle encouragement, blending new beliefs with existing ones to foster a less destructive social order. Imagine slowly nudging a culture to change its most ingrained controversial traditions through gentle suggestion and new philosophies. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's transformation of the Mbangala was a truly benevolent act aimed at civilizing them, or if it was primarily a pragmatic move to make them more manageable allies, less disruptive to her kingdom's stability and more appealing to potential European partners who condemned their rituals. Was it a genuine humanitarian effort, or a calculated political maneuver to ensure the long-term viability of her rule? This debate highlights the complexities of assessing historical figures' motivations, particularly when actions have multiple beneficial outcomes. Ultimately, the shifting pact with the Mbangala stands as a powerful testament to Nzinga, his long-term vision, and her extraordinary leadership. She didn't just use them as a temporary military solution. She worked to fundamentally transform them, turning a feared warrior society into a more integrated and stable part of her kingdom of Matamba. This demonstrated her capacity not just for warfare and diplomacy, but for profound social engineering, ensuring that the legacy of her alliance was one of lasting change and strengthened unity, a monumental achievement that secured her power and the future of her people. You've seen Nzinga's remarkable transformation of the Mbangala, demonstrating her long-term vision and social engineering. Yet, even with a more unified and settled kingdom in Matamba, the external threat remained relentless. This brings us to Portuguese resurgence, renewed pressure. The colonial power, despite setbacks and diversions, was not about to abandon its ambitions in Angola, and Nzinga would face renewed, often brutal campaigns aimed at finally subjugating her and her hard-won independence. Imagine the frustration within the Portuguese colonial administration. Decades had passed since Nzinga first defied them, and despite their superior weaponry and resources, she remained an indomitable force, an unyielding thorn in their side. The lucrative slave trade was constantly disrupted, their authority challenged, and their expansion hampered. This frustration fueled renewed determination, leading to intensified military campaigns against Matamba. You can almost feel the grinding gears of the colonial machine, refocusing its might on this stubborn queen. It's like a persistent video game boss. Just when you think you've beaten them, they reappear with more health and new attacks. The Portuguese, often reinforced from Brazil or Lisbon, launched larger and more aggressive expeditions into the interior, aimed specifically at destroying Nzinga's power base in Matamba. They brought more cannons, more muskets, and often more African auxiliaries coerced or paid into their service. The battles would have been fierce, involving pitched engagements and relentless sieges against Matamba's fortified settlements. Nzinga, in turn, would have relied on her perfected guerrilla tactics. Her knowledge of the terrain and the unyielding loyalty of her now more integrated army. Despite the renewed pressure, Nzinga remained remarkably resilient. She continued to lead her forces, adapting her strategies to counter Portuguese advances. She used scorched earth tactics, destroying crops and villages in the path of the advancing Portuguese to deny them sustenance. She maintained her intelligence networks, often knowing Portuguese movements before they reached their objectives, allowing her to prepare ambushes or avoid direct unfavorable confrontations. Her long experience had forged her into an almost unbreakable military leader. A quirky yet deeply significant, fringe tidbit revolves around the psychological toll on Portuguese soldiers during these prolonged campaigns against Nzinga. European troops, unaccustomed to the tropical climate, diseases, and the constant, unnerving guerrilla warfare, suffered immensely from illness, exhaustion, and demoralization. Their fear of Nzinga, the Witch Queen, as some called her, coupled with the elusive nature of her forces, often led to psychological breakdowns and high desertion rates. Nzinga knew how to fight not just their bodies, but their minds. Imagine fighting an invisible enemy in a debilitating climate, constantly on edge. It's a recipe for shattered morale. Historians still argue whether the Portuguese persistence in trying to defeat Nzinga was primarily driven by the economic imperative of the slave trade, or if it also became a matter of colonial prestige and the desire to stamp out a powerful symbol of African resistance. Was it purely about profit, or also about maintaining the illusion of European invincibility in Angola? This debate highlights the complex motivations behind colonial warfare, extending beyond simple economics to include pride and the assertion of dominance. These renewed Portuguese campaigns tested Nzinga's leadership and the endurance of her people to their absolute limits. The pressure was immense, leading to periods of intense hardship and constant vigilance. Yet Nzinga consistently managed to prevent a decisive Portuguese victory, preserving the core of her kingdom and her independence. This era of renewed pressure would, perhaps surprisingly, lay the groundwork for a period of more stable peace talks as both sides began to realize the immense cost of this prolonged, relentless struggle. The chessboard was set, but neither side could deliver a checkmate, leading both to seek a different kind of resolution. You've witnessed Nzinga's unwavering resilience against the renewed Portuguese onslaught, the kingdom a beacon of defiance amidst the chaos. Decades of relentless warfare, however, take a toll on everyone, combatants and civilians alike. This brings us to a period of strategic reassessment for both sides. Peace negotiations, weariness, and wisdom. After years of bloody, indecisive conflict, the Portuguese, and even Nzinga, began to realize that a new approach was necessary, leading to a long and complex process of seeking a lasting peace. Imagine the atmosphere in both the Portuguese camps and in Matamba. The colonial coffers in Luanda were drained by the constant military expeditions. Soldiers were exhausted and demoralized, and the supply of enslaved people, though still significant, was constantly disrupted by Nzinga's forces. For Nzinga, while she had maintained her independence, her people had endured immense suffering, displacement, and loss. The economic and human cost of perpetual warfare was unsustainable for both parties. The air itself might have felt heavy with a collective weariness, a longing for an end to the ceaseless conflict. It's like two exhausted boxers after many brutal rounds, realizing neither can land a knockout blow, and a draw might be the best option. The initiation of serious peace talks was a testament to Nzinga's enduring power and the Portuguese recognition that she could not be militarily defeated. They had tried for decades, investing vast resources, and still she stood, a formidable and intelligent adversary. The new Portuguese governors, arriving with fresh mandates, often realized that negotiation, rather than endless warfare, was the most pragmatic path forward. Nzinga, for her part, was also aging, and while her resolve was undimmed, she likely sought to secure a stable future for her kingdom and a definitive end to the raids that plagued her people. These negotiations were protracted and complex, involving multiple rounds of envoys, letters, and delicate discussions. Nzinga, ever the master diplomat, approached these talks with the same shrewdness she had displayed throughout her career. She pressed for full recognition of Matamba's sovereignty, the cessation of slave raids, and the return of territory and people. She would have been keenly aware of Portuguese duplicity, remembering past betrayals, and would have insisted on clear, enforceable terms. Quirky, yet deeply symbolic, fringe tidbit involves Nzinga's use of her own advanced age as a negotiating point. By this point, Nzinga was well into her 60s, an elder stateswoman and warrior. She could subtly convey that while she might be willing to talk peace now, her decades of unyielding resistance demonstrated that she was not to be trifled with, and that her legacy of defiance would inspire future generations if peace was not secured. Her very longevity became a testament to her power and endurance. Imagine using your gray hairs as leverage in a negotiation. I've seen it all, and I'm not afraid to keep fighting. Historians still argue whether the Portuguese entering into serious peace negotiations with Nzinga represented a genuine shift in their colonial policy towards a more conciliatory approach, or if it was simply a tactical necessity. Driven by financial exhaustion and the desire to re-establish stable slave trade routes, was this a moment of true colonial pragmatism, or merely a temporary strategic adjustment to a formidable foe? This debate explores the often cynical motivations behind colonial peace efforts. Ultimately, the turn towards peace negotiations marked a new phase in Nzinga's long and illustrious struggle. It was a recognition by both sides that the costs of perpetual conflict were too high. While the road to a lasting peace would be long and fraught with challenges, Nzinga's wisdom, resilience, and unyielding determination had brought her to the negotiating table as an equal, a feat few African rulers achieved against European colonial powers of the era. The battles might have paused, but the diplomatic war of wills continued, with Nzinga still fighting for every inch of her people's freedom. You felt the collective weariness that pushed both Nzinga and the Portuguese towards the negotiating table. The path to peace was never simple, but Nzinga's decades of unyielding pressure finally culminated in a series of crucial agreements, lasting treaties, hard-won stability. These weren't perfect solutions, but they represented a significant achievement for Nzinga, securing a degree of stability, in recognition for her kingdom that few African leaders of her time could boast against a European colonial power. Imagine the intricate dance of treaty-making. After years of skirmishes and failed negotiations, a more definitive treaty was finally concluded in 1656, signed by Nzinga and the Portuguese. This was a monumental moment. The terms included Portuguese recognition of Matamba as an independent kingdom, an end to hostilities, the release of Mbundu prisoners, and a commitment to cease slave raids into Matamba's territory. For Nzinga, this meant the preservation of her sovereignty and the protection of her people from the very scourge that had plagued them for generations. You can almost feel the tangible shift in the air, a release of tension that had lasted for decades, even if a cautious optimism still lingered. It's like finally getting a binding contract after years of verbal agreements and broken promises. This treaty was a testament to Nzinga's sheer persistence and her strategic brilliance. She had fought, negotiated, allied, and adapted for over 30 years to reach this point. The Portuguese, facing continued resistance, heavy financial costs, and growing rivalries with other European powers, recognized that a stable, albeit independent Matamba, under Nzinga, was preferable to endless, costly warfare. One of the key elements of these later treaties was the establishment of more formal diplomatic relations, including the exchange of envoys. This solidified Matamba's status as a recognized political entity in the eyes of Europe, a major victory for Nzinga. She gained a level of international legitimacy that was rare for an African ruler actively resisting European colonization. This wasn't a surrender. It was a hard-won compromise that preserved her core objective, the independence of her people. A quirky, yet deeply practical fringe tidbit about these treaties involves the re-establishment of specific trade routes under Nzinga's control. While she staunchly opposed the slave trade, She understood the necessity of commerce for her kingdom's prosperity. The treaties often stipulated controlled trade, allowing Matamba to engage in commerce for other goods, such as ivory and metals, ensuring economic stability without full capitulation to the Portuguese slave economy. It was a careful balance, asserting economic autonomy while navigating the broader colonial system. Imagine setting up your own independent import-export business, while larger corporations are still trying to monopolize everything. Historians still argue whether the 1656 treaty, despite its benefits for Nzinga, inadvertently set a precedent for other African kingdoms to seek similar peace agreements that ultimately bound them into the European colonial orbit. Even if indirectly, was Nzinga's peace a true victory for independence, or a necessary but ultimately compromising step that opened the door for future, more subtle forms of colonial control after her passing? This debate explores the long-term consequences of resistance movements and the often unavoidable entanglements with global powers. These lasting treaties marked a significant turning point in Nzinga's long career. They brought a measure of stability to her war-torn kingdom and secured recognition of her sovereignty. While the Portuguese never truly abandoned their long-term colonial ambitions in the region, Nzinga had carved out a space of relative independence for Matamba. She had demonstrated that defiance, even against overwhelming odds, could force powerful empires to the negotiating table and compel them to acknowledge the autonomy of an African queen. The struggle had been immense, but the peace, however tenuous, was a testament to her unyielding will. Word count: 1195. You've seen the hard-won peace treaties, a testament to Nzinga's decades of relentless struggle and shrewd diplomacy. With a measure of stability finally secured, Nzinga turned her formidable energy inward, focusing on rebuilding and strengthening her kingdom. This brings us to consolidating power, Matamba's strength. In her later years, Nzinga dedicated herself to establishing a robust, stable, and prosperous state, ensuring that Matamba would endure as a testament to her leadership long after she was gone. Imagine Nzinga, no longer constantly on the battlefield, but overseeing the vital work of nation-building. After years of war and displacement, Matamba needed to recover. Nzinga focused on consolidating her authority, fostering internal peace, and developing the economic and social infrastructure of her kingdom. This involved encouraging agriculture, rebuilding villages, and promoting trade routes that benefited Matamba directly. She was transitioning from a warrior queen to a stateswoman, dedicated to the long-term well-being of her people. It's like a brilliant startup founder, after securing investment, finally settling down to build the actual company. A key aspect of her consolidation was the integration of diverse populations. Matamba was home to not just the original Mbundu people, but also the acculturated Mbangala, various groups of refugees, and even some Portuguese deserters or traders who had chosen to align with her. Nzinga worked tirelessly to forge these disparate groups into a cohesive nation, fostering a shared identity and loyalty to the kingdom of Matamba, rather than just to her person. This often involved intermarriage, shared ceremonies, and the establishment of common laws and administrative structures. Nzinga also placed a strong emphasis on justice and governance. She established a clear system of law, maintaining order and resolving disputes within her realm. Her court became a place where grievances could be heard and fair judgments rendered. This demonstrated her commitment to good governance, providing a stable and predictable environment for her subjects, which in turn fostered loyalty and cooperation. People tend to stick with a leader who ensures fairness, don't they? A quirky and rather insightful fringe tidbit involves Nzinga's rumored patronage of local arts and oral traditions during this period of consolidation. Recognizing the importance of cultural identity and shared heritage, she may have actively supported storytellers, musicians, and artisans, using their talents to weave narratives of Matamba's strength, her own heroic struggles, and the collective resilience of her people. This wasn't just about entertainment. It was a deliberate strategy to build a national consciousness and reinforce the bonds that held her diverse kingdom together. Imagine a queen commissioning epic poems and songs about her own glorious battles. It's a powerful way to write history. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's success in consolidating Matamba's power was primarily due to her personal strength and vision, or if it was also a reflection of the inherent resilience of African societies and their ability to rebuild and adapt even after devastating conflicts. Did she single-handedly build Matamba into a strong kingdom? Or was she also a shrewd facilitator of her people's innate capacity for recovery? This debate highlights the complex interplay between extraordinary leadership and the underlying strengths of a society. The hard-won stability allowed Matamba to flourish under Nzinga's wise rule. It became a beacon of independence in a region increasingly dominated by colonial powers, a testament to what an African kingdom could achieve even under immense pressure. Nzinga, through her relentless efforts to consolidate power, ensured that Matamba was not just a temporary refuge, but a strong, enduring kingdom capable of facing the challenges that lay ahead. She was building a legacy, brick by painstaking brick, ensuring her people's future. You've observed Nzinga's meticulous efforts to consolidate power, transforming Matamba into a beacon of stability. As her life's long, arduous journey neared its twilight, her focus sharpened on securing the future, ensuring that the legacy of her struggles would outlive her. This brings us to final years. A legacy secured. In her advanced age, Nzinga made crucial decisions that aimed to guarantee the continued independence and prosperity of Matamba. Looking beyond her own formidable presence to the needs of generations yet to come. Imagine Nzinga in her late 70s, her body perhaps showing the marks of countless campaigns and endless negotiations. But her mind as sharp and strategic as ever. She understood the inevitable. Her reign, however glorious, would one day end. The critical question was, what would happen to Matamba then? Would it succumb to the Portuguese after her death? Or would her lifetime of resistance truly establish a lasting independence? Her final years were dedicated to answering this question, meticulously planning for a future without her at the helm. You can almost see her still commanding attention, but perhaps with a quieter, more reflective intensity. Like a grand chess master, contemplating the final, crucial moves. One of Nzinga's most significant actions in her later years was securing the succession of her sister Mukambu. While Nzinga herself had challenged traditional male-centric succession laws, she understood the need for a clear and undisputed transfer of power to ensure stability. Mukambu, also known as Donna Barbara, had been a loyal companion and had undergone Christian baptism, potentially made her more palatable to the Portuguese, a pragmatic choice for future relations. Nzinga carefully groomed her sister for the throne, passing on her vast knowledge of diplomacy, governance, and warfare, ensuring a continuity of strong leadership. It's like a retiring CEO handpicking and training their successor, crossing every T and dotting every I to ensure a smooth transition. Furthermore, Nzinga focused on institutionalizing the gains of her resistance. She didn't just want a peace treaty, she wanted a secure, recognized state. This involved strengthening diplomatic ties with other African kingdoms, reinforcing Matamba's administrative structures, and ensuring the continued integration of the Mbangala and other groups into a unified Mbindu identity. She was building robust systems that could withstand external pressures and internal challenges, even in her absence. A quirky, yet incredibly poignant fringe tidbit involves Nzinga's rumored efforts to convert her court and remaining Mbangala allies to Catholicism in her very final years. While her earlier baptism was strategic, some accounts suggest a more genuine, albeit late life, embrace of the faith, possibly influenced by Jesuit missionaries who had gained her trust. This could be seen as a final, desperate diplomatic play to secure Matamba's future by appealing to European religious sensibilities, or as a personal spiritual journey. It was a complex, potentially ambiguous move that speaks to her lifelong pragmatism. Imagine a legendary figure making a huge, surprising ideological shift right at the end, leaving everyone wondering about her true motives. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's careful planning for her succession and the consolidation of her kingdom truly secured Matamba as lasting independence, or if the continued pressure from the Portuguese meant that its autonomy would always be precarious after her formidable presence was removed. Did she genuinely guarantee her legacy, or did she merely delay the inevitable? This debate explores the limits of individual agency against powerful historical forces. Ultimately, Nzinga's final years were a testament to her profound foresight and her unwavering dedication to her people. She had not only led them through decades of war, but had also laid the groundwork for their future stability. Her efforts to secure her legacy ensured that Matamba would remain an independent kingdom for many years after her passing. A powerful symbol of African resistance and a direct continuation of her remarkable vision. She left behind not just a memory, but a functioning, vibrant state, a living monument to her indomitable spirit. You've observed Nzinga's meticulous efforts to secure Matamba's future, ensuring her legacy beyond her formidable reign. Now, the inevitable approaches. We come to death of a queen, end of an era. This moment, while a natural conclusion to a long and extraordinary life, marked a significant turning point for Angola, leaving a void that would be felt for generations and truly cementing Nzinga's place in history. Imagine the atmosphere in Matamba in the late 1660s. After decades of relentless struggle, strategic genius, and unwavering leadership, Queen Nzinga, the formidable Angola of Matamba and Ndongo, finally succumbed to age and the toll of her incredible life. She passed away on December 17, 1663, at the remarkable age of 81. Her death, though anticipated, would have sent ripples of sorrow and uncertainty throughout her kingdom, and indeed through the Portuguese colonial administration that had spent decades trying and failing to defeat her. You can almost feel the quiet hush falling over the land, the morning drums beating a slow, respectful rhythm for a leader who was truly larger than life. It's like the passing of a beloved national icon, leaving a profound sense of loss, but also an immense legacy. Her passing marked the end of an era of unprecedented African resistance to Portuguese colonialism in Angola. For over 40 years, Nzinga had been the primary obstacle to their ambitions, a constant source of frustration and a symbol of unconquered sovereignty. With her gone, the Portuguese certainly breathed a collective sigh of relief, likely hoping that the powerful resistance she embodied would finally crumble. However, Nzinga's meticulous planning for her succession, with her sister Mukumbu poised to take the throne, meant that Matamba did not immediately collapse. Her kingdom remained a strong, independent entity, a testament to her consolidation efforts. Yet the sheer force of Nzinga's personality and her individual strategic genius were irreplaceable. While Mukumbu was a capable successor, she faced the monumental task of leading Matamba without her sister. As unparalleled charisma and decades of experience in outmaneuvering the Portuguese, a quirky, yet incredibly revealing fringe tidbit about Nzinga's death is the Portuguese reaction to it. While they undoubtedly welcomed the news, there was also a grudging respect, even a sense of awe, for their longtime adversary. Some Portuguese records of the time acknowledged her intelligence, her diplomatic skill, and her military prowess, even while celebrating her demise. She had earned their respect not just as an enemy, but as a formidable equal on the geopolitical stage. Imagine your fiercest rival, after years of intense competition, publicly acknowledging your brilliance, even as they celebrate your retirement. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's death, despite her efforts to secure the succession, created a fundamental shift in the power dynamic in Angola that ultimately made full Portuguese colonial dominance inevitable in the long run. Did her passing merely delay the inevitable, or did her legacy of resistance instill enough strength in Matamba to genuinely alter the course of colonial history in the region for a significant period? This debate speaks to the lasting impact of individual leaders versus the relentless march of historical forces. Nzinga's funeral would have been a grand affair, a blend of traditional Mbundu rites and the Catholic ceremonies she had strategically embraced. It would have been a moment for her people to mourn their great queen, but also to celebrate her extraordinary life and her unwavering commitment to their freedom. The legacy she left behind was not just a kingdom, but an enduring spirit of resistance, a blueprint for defiance, and a powerful symbol of African agency in the face of overwhelming odds. Her death truly marked the end of an era, but the echoes of her struggle would reverberate through the centuries, inspiring future generations. You've been present for the passing of Queen Nzinga, feeling the weight of her long and extraordinary life and the vacuum her absence created. Now, as our journey through her story comes to its tranquil end, we turn to her enduring impact, the way her life continues to inspire and resonate across time and continents. Nzinga Sekos, a timeless legend. Her legacy is not merely historical fact, it is a living symbol of resistance, adaptability, and unwavering determination, shaping narratives of freedom and leadership even today. Imagine the historical record, often written by the colonizers, attempting to diminish or misrepresent figures like Nzinga. Yet, her story broke through, refusing to be confined or forgotten. Nzinga remains one of the most celebrated figures in Angolan history, a national heroine whose courage and strategic genius are taught to children and revered by adults. She is a symbol of Angolan independence and national pride, representing the resilience of a people who fiercely resisted colonial subjugation. Her face graces currency, her name inspires institutions, and her narrative is a cornerstone of the nation's identity. You can almost see her image, bold and unwavering, standing strong against the passage of time. Beyond Angola, Nzinga's legacy has transcended national borders, making her an important figure in the broader narrative of African resistance against colonialism. She is studied by historians, celebrated by Pan-Africanists, and recognized globally as a prime example of effective indigenous leadership confronting European expansion. Her story challenges simplistic narratives of colonial conquest, highlighting the agency, intelligence, and sophisticated strategies employed by African rulers. She reminds us that history is never a one-sided story. Her defiance of gender roles continues to inspire, making her a powerful symbol for female leadership and empowerment. In a world that often sought to confine women, Nzinga shattered expectations, not just ruling, but fighting and negotiating with unparalleled skill. She is a historical testament to the fact that leadership, courage, and strategic brilliance know no gender. Her story is a resounding answer to anyone who ever doubted a woman's capacity to lead with strength and wisdom. It's like finding a blueprint for a superhero, centuries ahead of its time, quirky yet deeply resonant. Fringe tidbit about Nzinga's lasting influence is how her story is often creatively reinterpreted in popular culture. From novels and plays to comic books and even video games, these modern adaptations, while sometimes taking artistic liberties, demonstrate the enduring appeal of her larger-than-life persona and her compelling struggle. Her legend continues to be retold and reimagined, ensuring her spirit of resistance lives on in new forms for new generations. Imagine a historical figure becoming a meme, but in the most empowering way possible. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's historical significance lies more in her pragmatic and often ruthless political maneuvering, or in the symbolic power of her unwavering resistance and her pioneering role in challenging colonial paradigms. Was she primarily a survivor, and a state builder, or an iconic figure whose legend inspires more than her actions strictly detail? This debate reflects the different ways we interpret heroism and legacy, blending the factual with the inspirational. Ultimately, Queen Nzinga and Bandi of Ndongo and Matamba is far more than a figure from a dusty history book. She is a timeless legend whose echoes resonate powerfully today, reminding us of the enduring human spirit, the importance of fighting for freedom, and the transformative power of a single individual's will against seemingly insurmountable odds. Her life is a profound testament to resilience, adaptability, and the unwavering pursuit of sovereignty. Now, as the long story of Queen Nzinga drifts into the quiet corners of your mind, allow the vibrant images of 17th century Angola to gently fade. Let the sounds of distant drums, the whispers of ancient diplomacy, and the rustle of battle-worn robes soften into a soothing hum. Release any lingering thoughts, any lingering questions, as if releasing a tiny paper boat onto a calm, dark river. Feel the gentle weight of the blankets, the comforting coolness of the fan, as your body settles deeper, heavier, into the soft embrace of your bed. There's no more need for vigilance, no more battles to fight, no more treaties to sign, just the profound stillness of the night, holding you gently. Allow yourself to float on the currents of complete relaxation, letting go of the day's worries, the week's demands, and simply dissolving into the quiet comfort of the present moment. Your journey through history is complete, and now a journey into peaceful slumber awaits. Drift effortlessly into the profound, soft darkness.